Hi, I'm Ed Highland, and welcome to Profiles. Today's guest is best known by students in Central Florida as a mentor, guest teacher, and advisor in schools throughout the region. But John Bersia's roots run deep in global foreign policy. His wide-ranging background includes being an international consultant, a member of the editorial board for the Orlando Sentinel, and winner of the Pulitzer Prize for an investigation into predatory loan practices. He now serves as Special Assistant to the President for Global Perspectives at the University of Central Florida. Welcome, John Bersia. John, first of all, just kind of give folks an idea of your background. What exactly are you doing in the way of helping grab the ear of President John Hitt?
I was invited by Dr. Hitt in October of 2001 to come out to the university to sharpen UCF's international focus. UCF, of course, had a variety of international programs, but he wanted to take things to the next level, to give students, faculty, staff, others at the university and in the broader community an opportunity to attend forums, lectures, and so forth where they could learn more about international affairs. He wanted us to be both proactive in the sense of creating programs that featured issues that weren't necessarily on people's radar screens, and also reactive so that if war broke out in Iraq, for example, we could put together a program literally within a couple of weeks.
And where do you see that going over the next couple of weeks, months, and years?
I see it going in several directions. We're going to continue building the programs we have in place. For example, we're bringing in speakers such as George Will, Charlene Hunter-Gault. We're going to feature forums on human rights and international terrorism. So very, very timely subjects and high-level specialists addressing the various issues. So we'll continue with that. We also work in the area of publications. We have a monograph series that comes out quarterly, and we're slowly bringing new publications into the fold. We also are building partnerships locally, regionally, statewide, nationally, and internationally. So I see over the next year or so much more of an emphasis on the building of international partnerships that will bring UCF and its programs to the attention of the world, more so than in the past.
Let's talk about the world and that catch-all, if you will, global perspectives. How are we perceived in the world right now? We, as Americans, have always thought of ourselves as a good people who try to help other groups, people around the world, and yet we are also involved in many conflicts around the world. How do you see our role right now, and how does the world look at us?
I think there's always been a distinction between the United States government and the American people, and that distinction may be blurring in modern times. But as I travel, and I have lived, traveled, worked in more than 50 countries over the last several years, I have found that by and large people still do like Americans. Yes, we have our detractors in various places, but for the most part people still do like Americans. They recognize that they do good work. When you as a nation become involved in conflicts, however, that can change perceptions, and it can anger people who perhaps were not dissatisfied with you in the past. Since the end of the Cold War, we have been in an increasingly complex world with far more conflicts than anyone ever imagined. Most people thought it was going to be an era of peace and prosperity, and it turned out to be an era of conflict. And part of the reason for that is that the old Soviet-US rivalry conflict created artificial restraints on the international system. When those restraints were lifted at the end of the Cold War, suddenly groups that had all kinds of agendas and interests were more free to operate, more free to travel, more free to take advantage of opportunities offered by advances in communications and technology and so forth. Some of those were terrorists, and those terrorists have been at the forefront of this sort of anti-Americanism that we have seen grow substantially in the 1990s and the early 2000s.
How can talking about and hearing about the world and international relations help us combat, if you will, the terrorism and perhaps improve our stature, our status among some of the people who may have a view of us as something less than a benefactor?
Well, first and foremost is the need for awareness. If you understand what is happening in the greater world, you will be in a better position to deal with the challenges and the opportunities that arise from it. And unfortunately, what happened in this country was that, to a significant extent, we turned our backs on the world beyond the United States in the 1990s, except in an economic sense. We believed that the Cold War was over. Essentially, we were entering a period of peace and prosperity. We talked about the peace dividend and so forth. And we didn't stop to think that the world could be even more contentious after the end of the Cold War. And yet it was, and it is. And so that's all very, very difficult for Americans to understand. We de-emphasized international awareness in our schools, in our news media, across the board in this country because we were so focused on the economy. And it was about the economy. But once the economy rebounded, we needed to think about other things. So that by the late 1990s, if we had started to pay more attention to what was happening in the world, we wouldn't have been as surprised as we were by the events of September 11, 2001.
Do you not think people are still more focused on, I'll call it the me factor? In other words, I'm worried about my job, I'm worried about my kid, I'm worried about my family, and perhaps not as open to understanding and wanting to learn more about what's going on in the world?
I think the me factor is obviously very, very important, and it affects people perhaps more so than some of the other issues we've been talking about. But I think that people also are beginning to understand the connections between their lives and the broader world. In Central Florida, we historically have not been as focused on the world as we should be, and today we are more focused than we were 5 years ago and more focused than we were 5 years before that. That's the result of a conscious effort by educators, by local government leaders, by business people, by news organizations who have come together to create forums for individuals, not just in academic settings, but throughout the community, to listen to discussions about critical international issues, specifically in terms of how those issues affect their lives. And I think the understanding is growing. We have a program in Central Florida called Global Connections, and there are some 30 organizations in 7 counties that support it. It's a nonprofit effort. The University of Central Florida is one of the founding members of that initiative. And through the program, we have reached literally tens of thousands of people in the last 5 years. Of course, that means we have hundreds of thousands to go, but that's okay. We've made a significant dent in that global awareness deficit.
Are we leaving something to our children that may be very difficult for them to deal with? I mean, is it too late for us to make some of these changes, and we are kind of leaving it to the next generation to come along and clean up our mess?
Well, to a certain extent, yes, but I think it is a responsibility that all of us bear, we in the current generation and our children as well, to learn as much as possible about these international issues so that we can devise ways to respond to them that are more effective, so that we won't be as surprised by future events. For example, if we develop a much stronger understanding of the terrorism challenge, we will be better positioned to deal with the aftermath. If we develop more consciousness about what is going on in the minds of people in other countries and other regions, we will be better prepared to deal with crises that may emerge in those places. It doesn't mean that you're not going to be attacked, that you're not going to be criticized, that you're not going to be disliked in some places, but you're building bridges, communicating better, understanding better, and in the final analysis, even though people all over the world are different, they are also alike in so many ways, and I think it's time to spend more of an effort on examining those similarities, acknowledging the differences, but understanding the similarities. We all want safety, security, prosperity, well-being for our family, and so forth.
Now, like many people, much of what I know is I've absorbed through the media or the internet, and it seems that even when the U.S. does something that is perceived as a great good, there is still criticism. So the education process seems to be necessary on both sides
Absolutely.
of the ocean,
Absolutely.
Oceans, as it were.
And one of the ways we can address that particular issue is by encouraging more of our young people to spend time overseas, not just traveling, but in substantive programs, exchange programs. We have thousands and thousands of students who come here from all over the world, and they take back to their countries an understanding of our system that they otherwise would not have had. We need to do the same thing in much greater numbers.
Now, you are a mentor, and I believe you'd mentioned that you have a number of interns that work in your office as well. Now, are these students from other parts of the world, or are these U.S. students who perhaps one day may be our ambassadors?
Well, a combination. We have 6 interns typically every semester, and it's an opportunity that is open, of course, to the students at UCF, but also to some students in the broader network that I had mentioned. And some of them are international students, so we have a good mix.
And where do you see this progressing? I mean, are these students that are just kind of observing and learning from you, and then going back to their state or their nation, as the case may be, and spreading the message? What are their roles? Are they developing into ambassadors, or how are they looking at their job futures?
Well, some of them will go back, and I hope will enrich their systems in the way you just described. Others who are American citizens, they may not have been originally, but they are now, will probably stay here and hopefully go on to jobs in the U.S. government and the business community and so forth, and continue to work with their friends and associates and contacts back home. So I think, again, we're building bridges.
Let's talk about some of the forums, the things that when you try and bring people together. How do you begin the process of planning that to essentially get the maximum impact? How do you start seeing, who I could perhaps bring into this forum setting?
Well, we start with a broad theme for the year, and in the current year the theme is human rights, and so we've had a number of forums focusing on different aspects of human rights. For example, we had Samantha Power in recently talking about the genocide issue, and she had just come back from spending a number of weeks in Sudan, and so she was able to address the Darfur issue specifically. And we've had others examining the issue of democracy and how it emerges and takes shape in different ways in different countries and in different cultures. In the spring semester, we have a number of individuals who will continue to touch on human rights themes. We have Charlene Hunter-Gault, for example, who will be visiting the campus, and she is currently the bureau chief for CNN in Johannesburg, South Africa. We will be hosting a human rights forum, sort of the culminating forum for the year, in April, that will feature a number of specialists from all over the world. So we start with the theme, and then we of course have other speakers who are unrelated to the theme in the interest of offering some diversity. And we're also very responsive to events as they develop. So again, if a conflict should break out, or if there should be a disaster such as the tsunami that recently struck Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean area, we're able to respond to that quickly and put together a forum that helps the audience understand the parameters, the ramifications, and so forth.
There seems to be some clear direction here that you have some specific ideas, and the forums are specifically generated, and Americans in general have some specific ideas. Yet for years now, and through several administrations, at least in my opinion, there's been some inconsistency in how we apply our message. You mentioned Darfur and the tsunami. I mean, here's two different instances. One is there's support from the U.S. to a very limited extent. The other, there's a tremendous outpouring, both by the American people and by the American government. So are we sending a mixed message or inconsistent message to the world about who we are and what we're trying to do?
Well, what's difficult in this country, as in all democratic systems, is that the leadership changes. Political parties come and go, leaders come and go, so you don't have that continuity that you might have in other places in terms of the image that you're projecting. So in the United States, it's always going to be an evolving approach to international issues. And the interest that the country expresses in things international also depends on how much the top leaders have a desire to explore those issues. If they're more domestically oriented, they're not going to spend as much time on international topics. I think that the issues that have impacted us most significantly in the last several years, from terrorism to globalization to you name it, are forcing U.S. leaders to spend relatively more time paying attention to the international system and to develop policies to confront the challenges that they encounter there. But there is going to be some inconsistency. A lot of what we do is reactive. And in the case of the tsunami, it was an epic catastrophe. People understood what it meant. They saw the suffering directly, and so they naturally felt moved to help. In something like Darfur, the geographic area is much smaller. It's an obscure conflict. They don't really understand. They don't see the kinds of images that we saw from the tsunami. And people don't like to think that a phenomenon such as genocide continues to afflict society in the 21st century. So they're two very, very different issues, and they've generated different responses. But I think as we pay more attention to what's happening internationally, there will be more coherency, hopefully, in what we do. And I think the benefit of programs such as ours is that we are helping people at a very young age to understand these issues. They will carry that knowledge with them as they progress through their careers, whether they take a government track or a business track or a nonprofit track or an academic track, and they will spread the word, and gradually will have this awareness, not in a few years, but over a period of decades, that we've needed all along.
The stabilization of Iraq is an ongoing situation for the United States and the government. How much do you see that playing a role, not today, but in 6 months, a year from now, in our image in the world, how it all plays out?
Well, how it all plays out is of critical importance, and I think what we as Americans need to do is stop playing the blame game regarding why we went into Iraq in the first place. That is irrelevant now. It may be instructive in terms of academic discussions so that you can shape behavior differently in future crises, but in terms of the crisis in Iraq today, we can't afford to continue to focus on what happened leading up to the intervention. What we have to talk about is what is happening on the ground now and how that affects the situation in Iraq, the stability of the region, and U.S. interests. And the fact of the matter is that Iraq is still significantly torn apart by civil conflict. It is not countrywide, as one might believe from watching news reports, but there is enough disruption going on that we can't afford to leave at this point. So those who are saying we should cut and run, that we've had too many losses, I understand that. And I have many people who have been injured or killed in Iraq who have been related to me or who are close to me in one way or another. And that's very disturbing. I understand that. But at the same time, if we don't fix that situation, Iraq will become more and more of a problem. If Iraq succumbs to chaos countrywide, you're going to cause chaos in the surrounding region, and then you have an issue, a challenge that is much greater than Iraq itself. So we need to fix the situation there in a way that Iraq is reasonably stable, and in a way that the Iraqi people, for the first time, will have a direct role in ensuring the stability and success of their system.
As an observer, I'm seeing some of the same things that I recall seeing after the Vietnam War, when individuals who had fought came back to this country. The difference, of course, being the way they were received when they came back to this country. But here are people who fought overseas, and they are now back, and they have a different perspective. Some people have basically said, I don't want to have anything to do with that again. Others come back and have a little more of an international, gee, we've got to get out and do more in the world kind of situation. Do you see this same kind of good, both sides of the coin scenario?
Absolutely. It's a similar experience to what I was suggesting earlier regarding the students. If you send someone overseas for educational purposes, that person is going to gain insights that he or she would not have gained under ordinary circumstances. The military is a little bit different because there's risk involved that is not involved in the other situation, but you're still having a similar experience. You're in a different place. You're interacting with people from a different culture. You're understanding that the world is very, very different, and then also very similar in some respects. Iraqis want peace. They want prosperity. They want stability. They want relative freedom. Even though they don't understand democracy in the way we understand it, it's something that they're interested in developing an understanding of. So most Iraqis want to move in that direction. There's a small group of people who want to prevent that from happening. Part of our job is to help the Iraqis move beyond that obstacle so that they will have self-determination and a sense of direction for themselves for the first time. So the soldiers who come back from that scene who are inspired to explore more in the international environment, I think that's terrific. And those who are perhaps turned off by it, I understand that as well. But we do have an obligation. We are part of an increasingly interdependent, shrinking world, shrinking in terms of travel, communications, technology, and so forth. And think about the tsunami. The tsunami underscored in a way that other crises could not how much we have of a stake in this together. That was a crisis that affected thousands and thousands and thousands of people in many, many countries, and ultimately even us. Because if you read some of the follow-up reports that looked at the impact of the tsunamic waves, in 36 hours those waves had traveled not just across the Indian Ocean, but but all the way to our shores. And they were small waves that were hitting the eastern seaboard from New England area down to Florida, but it's all connected. So imagine something stronger.
Do you see Orlando, getting back here to home a little bit, Orlando has always been known as an international destination, perhaps the premier international destination in the country. Do you see us having a special role, a special need to step forward in a role where we can wave the flag and at the same time invite others to come in and get a better understanding of us and also perhaps export some of our views as well?
I think we have a special role. There has been a conscious effort on the part of regional leaders in the last decade in particular to move in more of an international direction in terms of trade, in terms of tourism, in terms of awareness and so forth. And I think that's very healthy. We have the advantage of being known as perhaps the #1 destination in the world. There are other sites that could compete, I suppose, but pretty consistently we're one of the top destinations, if not the #1 destination. People want to come here. And if they want to come here for travel and tourism purposes, why not bring them here for other purposes? Bring them here to study the international issues that touch us here in Central Florida. And so I see a growing role for the Orlando area as a center for learning in the international arena, as a center for conferences, as a center for building networks among like-minded people in various countries so that we can advance thinking about how to deal with the challenges of our times.
Now, do you also get into any of the business aspects involved with the international community? Perhaps we have a philosophy here, we're bringing in international thinkers and speakers, perhaps international business would follow?
Oh, absolutely. The approach of our program is interdisciplinary, so business is there as a component in terms of the subject matter and in terms of our focus. But what you're suggesting, I think, is absolutely correct. If we think more about the international community, that could inspire people in other countries who would like to invest here, who would like to establish other relations here, to come. Some people may come and participate in conferences, like what they see, and think about other possibilities. It's all about networking. When you build awareness about a destination such as Orlando in Central Florida, in terms other than tourism, all kinds of possibilities exist.
And once again, our last couple of minutes here, what type of things do you see happening that are already planned and perhaps in the works that will perhaps bring a little more focus, a little more attention to the efforts underway at the University of Central Florida and also just Central Florida in terms of global perspectives?
Well, the last 3 years have witnessed this tremendous change in terms of the way everyone outside of Central Florida in the United States regards this region. Historically, this was not seen as a center for international studies. That perception has changed, and there are people in New York and Chicago and Los Angeles and other parts of the United States who know about UCF, people who didn't know about UCF 5 years ago, 10 years ago. That's a tremendous change. And what we're trying to do is to move to the next level, because now there are people in other countries who know more about UCF than they did before. And so over the next few years, we're going to try to build that international presence so that UCF is seen not just as a regional center for international studies or a statewide center or a national center, but a truly global center. We have the resources, we have the strategies, we have the capabilities, and again, because we are that #1 global destination, people want to come here. So they can come here and be routed into different areas of interest, and I think all of that will work to our mutual benefit.
I'm seeing an ambassador's robe there on the campus somehow.
Perhaps.
Perhaps we shall see. John Bersia, once again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Ed.
And that's this edition of Profiles. We want to thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. I'm Ed Highland.